States. Please welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much and welcome. I appreciate your taking a quick lunch and getting back here on time. I got a golf cart ride back because I followed a group. I had no idea where I was going and ended up in a restaurant over at the Waldorf. I didn't know where I was. Looked at my watch and realized I hadn't made enough plans to eat and get back here on time. So somebody took good care of me. I guess that's a good lesson, isn't it? Sometimes the world does that for us. Anyway, I appreciate you all being here on time and ready to get going. Leadership. You know, we started the day with a plenary about leadership. I'm sure you've all read enough articles. You probably have enough books on your bookshelves about leadership to fill up, or at least give you the satisfaction of having enough information about leadership. Everywhere we turn, we hear that word. It has a million different definitions. I'll tell you how I got into this work. And it was, well, when I started my work in the courts. I practiced law for just a short time. I was a high school English and French teacher, and I taught middle school and realized I wanted to do something else, so I got my law degree. Practiced for a while and then came back into education as a judicial educator in Minnesota. And my responsibility, of course, was to provide continuing and professional development for the judges in Minnesota. And it wasn't too long after I got started. We would do orientations for judges. We would do all kinds of different programming for folks all the way through their careers, that it became really clear to me that folks have very busy careers and that we develop through these stages in our career. And some folks make some choices about how they're going to show up, and some make other choices. So some of those judges that I got to know really well, who were really talented, smart folks, just kept creating new opportunities for themselves. And you can only hear so many DWI cases, I know that, but the ones that really kept reinventing themselves and really were resilient, which is the topic we're going to talk about today, had a whole different perspective than the group that I always say just got crabbier and crabbier. And I know I get smiles every time I say that. I've said it in front of judges who I like a lot. But it's true for all of us. And what I learned as I started studying about human behavior and change basically is what I'm talking about right now. That we all have choices. That the key to being a leader, and this comes out of the research now, Bill George's research shows us that there really isn't a set of characteristics that successful leaders share, but what they do share is an authentic understanding of who they are, of their life stories. So that each one of us brings a different set of life stories. And when we work from that and get meaning attached to our work, we're much more authentic and really much more successful over the long haul. So I went off to the Hudson Institute after about 13 years in Minnesota as a judicial educator to become a coach, and continued learning about stages of change and how we as adults manage change. And as you know, all of you are leaders in the courts, and you manage change all the time now. I mean, it used to be, I kind of used to joke with folks when I first started back in 1990. I can't believe I said this. Don't things ever change in the courts? And, now I go back as a consultant, and it's just amazing. I mean, I'm sure it's true in every one of your jurisdictions. The changes you've seen, probably in your careers, but for sure in the last few years. One of the things, so change is really where leaders live. We can differentiate between management as kind of maintaining the status quo. I'm not sure that's what it is. I don't think there's a bright line. But leadership definitely focuses on the future, on visionary thinking, on working through other people to bring about positive change. What we know as well is that the change that we are either bringing about or responding to is very different now than 20 years ago. And a lot of folks who study it call what we used to know as technical challenges or technical change, where there was a solution to our project somewhere. And as managers and leaders, we would identify, describe the problem, and then go out and find experts They might not be in our court systems, but they were somewhere who had the expertise to bring these consultants in and solve our problems. Most of the change that you've probably dealt with and that I've seen in Minnesota is now what I would call adaptive change or adaptive challenges, where we are now facing situations, problems that there are not solutions for. Nobody has ever really solved these problems before, and the process and the leadership characteristics that are successful with that are very different from the capacities that we've used before. So adaptive challenges require a lot of us to learn some new ways of being, of showing up, of deciding what matters. We have to know how to use dialogue. We have to know how to engage people in conversations, how to be iterative in terms of the next best way to do it or more information. So adaptive really takes us, and I like this slide, adaptive challenges really take us as leaders to the edge. Anybody have challenges like this in your work? You feel like you're building the bridge as you're walking on it? And there's a lot of literature now about this. You know, it's not just in the courts, but I work also with engineers and with accountants. I hear a lot of the same thing. It's really a difficult time to lead, and it's really a challenging time to lead, and it's a time that takes a lot of creativity and a lot of resilience. So when I do my work in leadership development, I often talk about leadership by using the iceberg metaphor. And what I'll say to the folks that I'm working with is that as leaders, we live above the line. We do. We have to-do lists. We accomplish things. We get assignments from folks. We get things done. And you know what that life is like because you live it in spades every day. There's never enough time in the day to get your to-do list done. And that's the things that we put on our resumes, or that's the things that we get awards for, isn't it? What we accomplish. But the other part of leadership development that really gives us the skills necessary for these adaptive challenges is what's below the line. That's the being part of us. And below the line are things like emotions, things like assumptions, things like learning styles, things like values, all the things that are part of our story of who we are in terms of what really matters to us. And so a lot of times when I'm working with folks and I see them and they've been living above the line day after day, accomplishing, they're really exhausted. They really lose their focus a lot of times because that to-do list never gets shorter, and they don't ever really feel a sense of accomplishment. And what I help them do, and I think what I'm going to invite you to do today, is go a bit below the line. And what we're going to do is talk about resilience, and we'll define that in a moment, and how necessary it is for you as leaders and for what work that you do to sustain our justice system, but also how you can learn some concrete practices. And I would assume that many of you have them because you're experienced. But what I am going to present to you today is all research-based. Intuitively, we probably knew this for a while, but now we have research to back it up, that help us understand our own resilience and how we can continue to develop and thrive in our work. Just another way to say this, I guess. Experience, education, training, what's really going to sustain us now is the ability to understand our resilience and to keep moving. So here's a definition for you. I think the interesting part of this, and the parts that we'll explore a little bit as we do this workshop today, is that it's looked at in this definition as a multidimensional characteristic, biological, psychological, and spiritual, that enables us to adapt to disruptions or changes in our lives. And what the ultimate goal is really to thrive, is to experience well-being as we are leaders in the courts and in our lives. So leadership becomes a much bigger concept when I work with folks. It's not just our careers. It's not just what we do when we leave home in the morning for 8, 10, 12 hours. It's how we show up wherever we go. To the grocery store, to the golf course, to work, with partners, with kids, with whomever. And it's really at our core. It's that below the line, knowing who we are and we can talk about legacy, but what we want to leave behind when we literally leave a room or when we leave our work. So that's kind of big picture where I go with this leadership work. And also the importance of resilience in that, because we do have long careers. We have a lot of uphill battles. That's life. And what we know about folks who do well is that they have this tendency or this ability to react to things and bounce back. So where does this come from? A lot of the work that I do is now based on the research that comes out of the University of Pennsylvania in the positive psychology world. Anybody heard about that? Okay. It's an interesting endeavor by a man by the name of Martin Seligman, who is a psychologist, had spent 20 years in the field, was a leader in the field. And about 10 years ago, he said, it's time for us to figure out, instead of looking at people who are mentally ill and have psychological disorders and don't live very fulfilling lives and that come to see us as psychiatrists and psychologists, what do those people who thrive, who experience well-being, have in common? And so they started on this journey of research. And he now has people all over the world. He has school systems using what they've found. It's part of a lot of psychiatrists' toolboxes now. So the question was, what do we know about folks who, and they called it happiness. You probably heard that at the beginning. They used to call it happiness, and now they've kind of moved over to well-being. But it's about thriving, and it's about thriving every day in the face of change, in the face of adversity, in the face of a normal life. So one of the things that I'm going to ask you to do today is based on the research that he found and that he and his colleagues undertook. What they did was look back over 200 years through many, many cultures and religions to see what they could find across all those cultures and religions that signified a human being who was thriving or experiencing well-being. And what they found, and they've named, is character strengths. They found that there are 24 character strengths. And you'll find this in your handouts. We're going to go to it in a little while, but you have that there. And we're going to work with that a bit, because what their research, as they've used this, has been is that people who work from their character strengths have much more likelihood of developing and maintaining their resilience, of bouncing back, because those are the things that really energize us in a positive way. And as we work through this, I think you'll see how that fits with you. So here's what I'd like to ask you to do. In your materials, I think it's on page 4 or 5. I don't have them in front of me. At our best. I think there's some back there. Okay. Anybody need materials? 5. Okay. On page 5, you will find at our best. I'm going to ask you to take a few minutes and to reflect on yourself in the past year. I don't care how far back you go. I mean, what's interesting is you probably come up with the same character strengths. But in the past year, in your role as a leader in your system, think of a time when you were absolutely at your best. Where were you? Who were you with? What were you doing? What was it like for you? You know, you can go above the line and talk about what you were doing. You can go below the line and talk about what it was like for you. What were you experiencing emotionally? Take a few minutes to reflect. Write down some notes, whatever you want to put on that piece of paper. And then I'm going to ask you to partner with someone and to share your stories with each other. For those of you who are from Minnesota, we always say we're way too shy to talk about ourselves when we're at our best. But that's not true. We all love to talk about ourselves when we're at our best. So share your story with your partner. And if you're looking at that page that has instructions on it, you'll see under those steps with your partner, number 2 is identify, what it was about you. And then number 3 says identify or name the character strengths that you have. So you'll tell your partner what character strengths are there when you hear his or her story. So character strengths are 2 pages before that worksheet. So if you just want to back up to pages 3 and 4, and you'll have some time to look at that more in depth after you do your self-reflection. You'll see that there are 6 major categories, and then under that, there's a total of 24 character strengths. A couple questions that came up in our session this morning. How does this compare with Strength Finders? Because I would bet a lot of you have used that. And Strength Finders is more skills-based, but it's the same concept. When we work from our strengths, we are energized, it's positive, it builds resilience. So and then we'll have a little bit larger group conversation after you talk with your partners. So start on your own, reflect on yourself at your best, and then I'll remind you, if you haven't already found a partner, to find a partner and start sharing. Okay? All right. So let's come back to the full group. I know some of you are still having your conversations. The energy always goes up in the room when we talk about ourselves at our best. That's the whole point of this. When we're working at our best, we have a lot of energy, which builds resilience. So it's that simple and it's that hard. I would like to hear from a few of you about what you heard in your partner's character strengths. Raise your hand and we'll get you a mic so we can all hear you. Would you be brave, and one of you, and share with us what you heard in terms of character strengths? You could come over there, whichever is easier. There's a hand. Thank you.
Hi, I heard determination, even though people told him, this is not going to happen, what's the point? He's like, no, we have to be prepared, and guess what? It happened.
Okay. So the determination was that your partner's character strength? Okay. Do you agree with that? Okay. And as you reflect on your career, has it been there with you the whole time? Good answer. That was the right answer for that one. Thank you. Other character strengths you heard in your conversation? I'm always curious to see how they compare with other groups of court managers, because they do when I do this.
My partner shared his story, and I heard bravery and perseverance.
Okay. Bravery. Any other bravery in this room? People with that? Okay. Okay. So think about what it takes to work in the courts. Think about the people you work with, not your staff, but the people who show up, who aren't always really happy with what's happening, with judges, with lawyers, all of the people that need something from you. And then you try to introduce a new idea, right? Takes some bravery. And perseverance? It's a good one for the courts. Good. I think we have one back there, and then we'll come back up here.
My partner shared with a story about implementation of a computer system. And from her story, I got the fact that she believes in herself. Okay. That was something that she could do first time, but she was able to pull it off, as well as discussion about change, getting people who were not accustomed to doing things in that type of environment to agree to allow her to implement it. So okay. I saw that as part of being bravery, as well as being able to just get people to work together as a team.
Okay, thanks. Again, bravery, knowing you're going into uncharted territory with folks who might be a bit, take a little bit of convincing that it's a good place to go. Good. And then all that teamwork which requires social intelligence to understand what's going on with everybody. Thank you. And another one here.
Jessie gave me her story, and I thought, she's very young in the courts, and I think that what she was doing showed very much courage, judgment, and perspective.
Okay. Judgment and the critical thinking and able to figure out how it all fits and keeping your perspective. Good. So all of you should have, if you talk with your partner long enough, 3 or 4 of those character strengths that came out in your story. If you take a look at page 3 it's the page right before the VIA classification, so it's the one before that. There's a lot of different ways you can work with this in terms of resilience. First of all, for yourself. As a manager of your own leadership and your own work, one of the things that they have found through their research is that if we identify our character strengths and then over the course of our long careers find new ways to use that strength, it builds resilience, it builds positivity, it makes us more engaged, obviously, in our work. So, this is true for people new to the courts, but especially for those of us who worked in the courts a long time. And I hear it from a lot of folks. I need new challenges. I hear it from judges. I've heard this set of facts a million times when I work with them. So what our responsibility is to ourselves, if we decide we're going to manage it ourselves, is to look at how could I use this character strength in a different way? How could I find new ways to use this so that I'm energized? Now, the really interesting part of this research is they went the next step from maybe you've got 4 or 5 character strengths. They found that each of us has what they call signature strengths. And if you look at that page that I asked you to take a look at, page 3, you'll see about halfway down or a third of the way down the page the criteria for signature strengths. You just can't help but use it. At the end of the day, it's 5:30 and somebody comes into your office. If they want to sit down and plow through a budget, does that energize you or does it deplete you? If you're me, your eyes glaze over in about 30 seconds. And you say, well, how was your day? That's when I figured out, Lana, you should go into coaching. You get to sit and listen to people and ask questions. Looking at budgets wasn't what called on my signature strengths. We can do it. We can all do it. We're smart. But do we really want to? And as we get more experience, we realize I've got to have some of these other things in my life every day. So the rest of the definitions, it'll resonate with you. So what I'd like you to do is look at those character strengths that you've identified and maybe circle what you know in your heart are your signature strengths. Because that is you at your best. It's your authentic leadership right there. And what we know about all this adaptive change and challenges is that if we go to our signature strengths and figure out ways to use them as we're managing these challenges and changes that take twists and turns. There's nothing linear about adaptive challenges because you're always interacting with people, getting more information, going back and looking at things. So what I would like you to do is to identify your signature strengths and see how that fits for you. Just have a short conversation with your partner about what you think your signature strengths are, or one of them, and how you see yourself using it now that you call it that. Where does it come out in your work? Just a few minutes to talk about it. Page 2 is the information, right, about signature strengths. Is that right? Did you see that there? I called it page 3, I think. Yeah, you can just use that to figure out what yours are from your list of character strengths that you did with the at your best. Or if there's something that you think wasn't identified at your best in that exercise, but really is one of your signature strengths from that list, that's fine too. The point here is to identify your signature strengths. Sure. Yeah, one of the 24. Yeah, the bulleted ones. Good question. Thank you for clarifying that. Use one of the bulleted ones, not one of the 6. So go deeper into each of those and pick one of the bulleted ones, or 2. We need some. So we've identified character strengths. Hopefully you've identified a couple of signature strengths. One of the practices that you can use as a leader is to work with those character strengths and signature strengths of your own. Another responsibility, obviously, as a leader is to develop the folks that you work with. And on that page that I directed you to on page 2, there's a link to a website that's connected with these folks in Pennsylvania where if you want to do some of this work with your folks, you can do this exercise, or you can go online and have them do what's called the VIA Strengths Survey. And it's, I think it takes about 30 minutes, and you answer some questions and you get a printout that lists in order these 24 strengths that show up in the responses to the questions. And what we know about these strengths is that we can develop all of them. There are some that come very naturally, and obviously the signature strengths are really who we are at our core. But if we want to develop some of them, we can do that. So as a manager and a leader, if you do this with your folks, you'll have, and you may be able to identify if you worked with them for a long time without this. You know, when you ask them, when have you been at your best, and they tell you, it'll click for you what they really love to do. Most of the leadership development theory now is that we don't start from weaknesses. I mean, if you have fatal flaws and, you know, you can't add and subtract or you can't figure out caseflow management, you wouldn't be here. I mean, what it takes to do your jobs, you all have. But what we know where we get the biggest return on investment with leadership development is where we identify strengths and then we leverage those strengths. So we put a couple strengths together, we find new ways to do it, and so on. So that's an important part of keeping your folks resilient as well in these jobs that can really be long hours and some tedium if that is the case for them. So that's one of the ways that we can look at resilience as leaders. One of the things to remember here, that's why we do this, is we get more of what we focus on. So if we focus on what gives us energy, we get more energy. If we focus on the worst this day could be from the minute we get up and all we see is bad things and things going wrong, that's what we get more of, don't we? We see it. So it's a good reminder to us. It's our responsibility. Another part of the research on leadership and on resilience and leadership skills comes out of the McKinsey report, which took a look at leaders around the world and identified what they called centered leadership. And they found that leaders who succeeded and who continued to produce over their long careers all had something in common here. And it was that they learned to manage energy, not time. That work-life balance is a myth. And it's those folks who learned to identify what gave them energy, what zapped their energy, and how they could learn different practices for building energy were the ones that really succeeded. So we're going to take a look at that concept now. One of the models for this managing energy is called the high performance pyramid. And a couple of folks took a look at busy executives, managers like you, who never really get through their to-do list, 24/7, always on call, always more emails than you want to have in your email inbox, and thought, how is it that our bodies respond, first of all, to stress and get depleted and our energy goes. And the flip side, how can we learn practices that we can use every day that will build our energy? So it used to be we'd wait for those 2 weeks of vacation, and we thought, that's where I'm going to get renewed. And what we know about that, and most of us probably have experienced, is by about an hour and a half back after that 2-week vacation, what does it feel like? Like you didn't go on, I've said it a million times, it doesn't feel like I had a vacation. So what I like about this is they've actually, through their research, found things that we can do throughout our workday. And I'm not going to ask you to do all of these that I'm going to introduce you to. But if we learn one or two, like the practice of identifying signature strengths and making sure we use them, we will up our energy. We will feel more energized. So that's the concept here. And what they have found is that in this pyramid, working from the ground up is how we build our energy. This isn't a hierarchy of energy. It isn't that what's at the top is better than what's at the bottom. But this is the forms of energy that have been identified for all of us as human beings. So we take a little bit of a look further at this and identify what the ideal state is for each of these. So physical energy, we all know this, you know. When we have high energy, we've all identified for ourselves what times of the day are our high energy times. We know what kind of work we can do then. And we probably have a lot of practices that we all have to keep us energized physically. How much sleep are we supposed to get every night? 8 hours? That's close. We know how we should eat. We know we should drink water every day. There's a lot of different things that we've learned and that research has taught us that build our physical energy. So the measurement is low energy, high energy. Obviously, optimum would be high energy. And as we think about this, we think when we are high energy, we have the capacity then to be at our best emotionally. Does that make sense? Yeah. This isn't rocket science, is it? We know this intuitively. So that emotional energy or that optimum emotional state can be described as being, the scale there is negative to positive. And we want to be in a real positive place where we feel confident, we feel calm. It's kind of that calm energy where we're still really performing well, and it's kind of that flow that people talk about when I'm at my best. A lot of the stuff out of Pennsylvania says there's a tipping point for people who thrive of positive to negative. And the tipping point is 3-to-1 positive to negative. So during your day, if you have 3-to-1 positive to negative responses, you will be at that tipping point where you should be able or should be experiencing well-being and thriving. It means we're, kind of on the edge of it. Teams are 5-to-1. So when you think about the teams that you work with, and I've actually done this with some folks when I was working with a team in the court system. And the complaint from the manager of the team was, oh, they're so negative. We have our meeting every Monday morning to talk about what we're going to do, and I think it was an IT team, and what we're going to get accomplished. It isn't 30 seconds before somebody makes a negative comment. And you all know that, don't you? I mean, you see what happens in a room, don't you? You see what happens in a group of people when you look at somebody and smile. What do? Smile back. Our emotions are contagious. We have that loop brain, which means the research is amazing. They put 3 people together in a room, chairs facing each other right next to each other. The one with the most expressive face will show up on the other 2 people within 90 seconds. So you think about that as a leader when you show up at your team meetings. You also think about it as a leader when you show up at your team meetings and you've got the grumpiest person in the world sitting there, and it's not going to get any better, if there's a history or whatever. And I figure that's as much a performance issue as if they're getting some of their above-the-line work done. But it's often very hard to have conversations with people about that, isn't it? You don't smile enough. Somebody told me that once, and it made me so mad I never smiled at that person again. So I don't think it was quite the right thing to say to me. That's probably not the right way to do it. But, you know, the research, and we're not, when I say positive emotions, I'm not saying la, 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 everything's wonderful, isn't life grand? I mean being real and authentic. And probably the skill, the cognitive skill that we have, that we can develop as leaders is called positive framing or reframing. Where things go poorly, we admit it to folks, and I'm sure you guys do this, you may already know that terminology, and we reframe it or we frame it in a way that is positive, acknowledging that something went wrong. And those are, you know, that's below the line understanding of who we are as leaders, knowing where we go when things go wrong. So part of that positive energy, and there's lots of practices for maintaining or developing positive energy, really plays out in our teams and in our interaction with people. When we are in that positive, calm, confident state is when we can perform best mentally. So you see how this builds. And the ideal state for a mental or for cognitive work is focused. You all do a lot of work here, I'm sure. You can focus, you can analyze, you can make decisions, you can take in a lot of information if you're reading through data, and you can make decisions and move on. If we're not, you know, physically set, emotionally ready for that, we can often just get stuck in projects. You know what that's like. A project that's been on your desk or you've been working on for a few weeks, and the next time you come back to it, before you even get started, you just kind of go to the other side of, oh, I can't do this. I'm going nowhere. So what we know about that to build that energy for being able to focus comes from physical and emotional, but there are also some practices that we can do, some things that we can do to keep ourselves energized at that level. Part of the way that we think about things is mental energy. So a lot of what leaders do is think about how they think. I know this might sound kind of weird, but it's true. What Seligman found at Pennsylvania is that he called it explanatory style. He started his research on lawyers. And he studied their explanatory styles and found that when pessimists had something go wrong, they explained it by personalizing it. I'm a failure. I've never, ever been good at whatever. 3 Ps. Personalizing it, looking at it as pervasive. Not only am I a bad manager and lawyer, I'm a terrible mother, I'm a terrible sister, I'm a terrible dog owner. And pervasive and permanent. I'm always going to be bad at this. That's a pessimistic explanatory style. And some of you are shaking your heads and saying, yep, that's where I go. It's fine if you go there. What we know about our brains is we can change them. What's interesting is optimists, when something goes well, do those 3 things. Personalize it and say, yep, I've always been pretty good at solving problems. Yeah, permanent. Pretty much successful. You know, once in a while I stumble. And pervasive. I'm going to be as good at this marathon that I'm going to run. So it's, you know, pessimists internalize when it goes poorly. Optimists externalize when it goes poorly. And I have one of each. I have 2 sons. And I have one who is an optimist, like the world never, another problem just makes him happier. Solving problems, having the next hardest thing to do. When I was raising him, and he was a teenager, everything that went poorly, he externalized, so he blamed everybody else. And of course, you know, I talked all about personal responsibility and how you have to look at things, which was fine, parenting. But I see him now as a young adult, and I see my pessimist son, who was always, you know, smart, did everything right, followed the rules. Which one do you think is a happier mid-20s person? The one that externalized it. You know, he now takes responsibility. But it's very simple for him to have something go poorly and say, I guess that person didn't give me the right dimensions. He's a metal sculptor. I'll have to get him. And then he calls him up, and he's not angry. He doesn't blame him, and he gets him. Rather than saying, I guess I can't do math. I've never been good at math, you know. So when you think about your explanatory style, think about what an impact that has on your leadership. The people who work for you could tell me what your explanatory style is, couldn't they? This isn't a secret. People who know you well, who live with you. And what we know, as I said earlier, is that the way our brains work, the neuroplasticity, we can change the way we think about things. So there are skills and ways to change from a pessimistic explanatory style to an optimistic. And one of the things that we can do if we're pessimists is argue with ourselves when we are in the moment, self-talk, saying, I've never been good at this. So my next line would be, oh, come on, Alana. Remember that time when, because we can do it for our friends and for our colleagues who come and ask for input, can't we? So that's one of the ways we can really change our explanatory style. I think reframing also does that. You know, if we catch ourselves going down that, I'm a failure, I'll always be a failure, and everybody knows it, and that kind of thing. I'm exaggerating, but for some of us it's true. What that builds when we change or move a little more on the spectrum to optimistic explanatory style is it builds resilience in us. Instead of looking at what we do as successful or a failure, it's on a continuum. I'm getting better at doing budgets. I'm still not perfect at analyzing this, but I'm getting better, that kind of thing. That's reframing. And that's a skill that we've learned through our research that successful leaders have. And that we can teach to folks. You know, if you have a really pessimistic person working for you, you know what it does. And you can explain to them that it's not the only mindset that they can have. They can change their mindsets. So a lot of the mental energy that we have, we can manage that way. And we can identify when it's obviously positive and energizing or draining. So then at the top of the pyramid is what they call spiritual energy. For some people that is practicing religion. For some people that is connecting with something else that really matters a lot to them. Values. You know, what difference does it make if I work in the courts? Well, for a lot of us, it makes a big difference because it's this whole system of justice. I hear that a lot from people who work in the courts in terms of where they get their energy. This really matters. It matters in my jurisdiction, it matters in my state, it matters in my country, what I do. And that's where the spiritual energy comes from. What's interesting, I think, about this whole concept of managing energy. So this would be below the line, wouldn't it, on that metaphor? Managing our energy. It would be thinking about, you know, our forms of energy, where we get energy, where we're zapped from energy, and then maybe thinking about ways that we can change that a little bit. But what we know is if we want to make changes, we start at the top of the pyramid. We start at the top, and when you think about it, it probably makes a lot of sense. If somebody, what's a really difficult change people make? If somebody wants to quit smoking, we know all the facts about smoking. You know, there's a lot of data now about people who have heart attacks and know that if they change their lifestyle, they'd be healthier, but they don't. And what these folks say is that if we start at the top and connect that change that we want to something that really matters to us. Like I have a good friend who tried to quit smoking 45 times. I mean, she'd admit it. And then she had her first child. And she said she didn't think twice again about smoking. I don't know if that's true. I'm not a smoker, but if that's true, that's pretty amazing. Because all of a sudden, she pictured herself, you know, in terms of What are my values? What am I teaching? You know, I don't have to tell you that. So that's kind of an interesting way to look at how this energy pyramid works. You know, as I said before, there isn't a hierarchy here, but it's interesting to see how one builds the other and how they are all interrelated for us in our leadership and the practices that we have. So I'm going to ask you to think about this question. I'm going to have you talk with your partner again. From the information that I've given you about these forms of energy, when you reflect on yourself, which one of these energy sources do you really count on right now and it really works well for you? It would really be positive. You know, it would be at high on the scale if you're measuring one of those. Which one of these energizes you? When you're tired, you can count on it. Or just that you know is a really important part of you. So identify it and have a conversation with your partner about what that's like and what practices that you have to keep that as a positive source of energy. So identify it, what's it like for you, and what practices do you have. Okay? Okay, now I'm going to ask you to do some really hard work. This has been easy so far, I know. When you look at that energy pyramid and those 4 sources of energy, you just identified the one that you can really count on, that works really well for you. And you've probably got practices, even though you didn't call it that, for making energy and when you feel depleted, getting energy. Now what I'd like you to do is take a look and reflect on those 4 and pick the one that you would like to work on to improve your energy in that area. So which one of those 4 energy sources would you really like to develop a practice for? Just one, not 10 practices, that would increase that energy for you. And what would it give you if you did that? So what I'm saying really is, what change would you like to make so that you have more energy connected to one of those sources, of those 4 sources? So reflect on that a little bit. Talk to your partner about it and see where you end up in terms of what practice. Again, it's kind of the same thing, except which one would you want to develop more of? And then what is one practice that might fit for you to do that? Okay? So let's take a look at page 8 in your materials. This is a list of practices that have come out of the research with this high performance pyramid that work to build that source of energy. And a lot of these you already know. A lot of these are simple. When I work with folks who are in leadership development programs, I say, find one thing, one practice. Don't come up with 10, because change is hard, isn't it? But what we know about leadership is that leaders have to be pretty comfortable with change in their own lives first if they're going to be successful with transforming organizations and bringing about change where they work. So I'm sure some of you do these already, but what the advice would be to pick one that really fits and then try it for a while. Do you know how long it takes to build a habit? Because we want one of these to become a habit for you. 30 days. Somebody told me 5 weeks, so it's at least 4 or 5 weeks probably to build a habit. So you really, and the best time of the day to practice one of these practices when you're learning a new habit is to place it right after there's something that you do every day. So I have an office in my home. I go up there every morning and I turn on my computer, and I have been working at learning to meditate for 2.5 years. And I'm making a little progress. I'm reframing here. And so that's when I meditate. Because I can find every excuse in the book not to. Oh, it's too early, it's too late, I got to take the dogs for a walk, I'm hungry, it's lunchtime, I have to make a phone call, I'm too tired, I'm not tired, So the advice from the experts is to place that in your day right after something you automatically do. If you look at these practices that are suggested, let's start, I'm not going to go through every one, but I just want to call out a couple that are, I think, worth noting. Under the physical energy, number 7. How many of you already do this? I knew this would get a laugh. It always does. Take breaks every 90 minutes at work. The research shows in order to keep up our ability to focus, our mental energy, but it's starting with this physical, isn't it? We need to take a physical break. You only need to take a 5-minute break. And most of the people I work with in the courts don't even take lunch. So I say, let's start with lunch. Put some food in there. That's going to be a little motivating. That doesn't count eating at your desk. I see that. So, if you're willing to take a risk here on taking a break, you can blame it on the research that you learned about here. I have to take a break. Anyway, that's one of the physical things that I see that, and it works. I wouldn't want to suggest it if it didn't. Another one, under emotional, music moves us right over to that right side of our brain. And sometimes dancing in there is even better. So, the point is to move from the left side where it's all logical, linear, analyzing. If you give that side of your brain a break and move it over to the right side with music. One thing I learned early on, when I'm having a bad day, go to an art museum. That does it for me. Just put me in an art museum, and I'll go right over to the positive. So you can all figure that out for yourselves. What is it that does that? But a lot of times it's switching the sides of our brains. Another one that really works well is the one, end each day with 3 good things. And this comes out of the University of Pennsylvania research again. And I've done this with a lot of folks that I coach who start out really negative, they're really worn out, they're burned out, they have no resilience. And I'll say, what was good about your day yesterday? And they literally can't think of one thing. And we've all been there. I mean, I'm not saying there's anything mentally wrong with folks. This isn't mental illness. It's called burnout and exhaustion. And so the practice is to end every day, right before you leave that office and close the door, and write down on a pad of paper 3 good things. And they can be simple, complex, whatever. But as you write those 3 things down, either jot down or just say to yourself the part that you had in it. For instance, if I had a meeting with my team and I jot down good discussion with my team, I might say, in what part did I have? I asked good questions, or I helped them frame that in a new way, or I brought good data to the meeting. So give yourself a little bit of credit and do, 3 things. It shouldn't even take 5 minutes once you get it down. So it's a really quick practice. And the research shows that it's energizing. It builds resilience. So it's a good one to consider. One I worked with, I think she was an accountant. She was a partner in an accounting firm. 2 kids commuted 100 and some miles a day. You know that. You know the story because we all live like that. And she said what she did was, because they had so little time together, was they would always eat something together at night, and that was their family practice. So the kids did it too. And it's a great way, you could do it with your team at work. It's a great way to model leadership behavior, move folks over to more positive ways of looking at things. Under the mental energy, a number of you asked me what OHIO stands for. Only handle it once. So everything that comes across your desk, the rule is only handle it once. And I'm sure you all do that. We know that if it sits there and sits there and sits there, it just gets to be negative. We sit down and look at it one more time, and it just drains us. So it's a good practice. Deep breathing exercises, too, they're so much related to the physical, really, that will restore us emotionally and cognitively. The deep breathing that really works well is just, I had 2 kids with asthma, so we learned this when they'd have asthma attacks. And I had no clue this was a leadership practice or that it would really make my anxiety go down, but it does, to just sit still and breathe. So breathe into the count of 6, 5 or 6, breathe out to the count of 3. Do that 4 or 5 times, and your body will literally just go. You'll relax, and then you can focus, feel more positive. So it's a good practice. And the last one that I just can't say enough about is under spiritual, and it's meditation. All of the research, brain research, it's just amazing how different people's, it's hard. I told you, 2.5 years. Different people's brains are, after 5 weeks, so maybe that's the habit for it, 5 or 6 weeks of meditation. They actually look different when they do whatever those things are called, to look at what parts of your brain lights up. I'm really scientific here, aren't I? But anyway, it reduces stress, it reduces anxiety. What we know about people who practice meditation from the people around them is that they seem to be much more present. Like when I'm talking to you, I'm actually looking at you. When you come into my office to talk about a project, I'm not checking my email or my mind isn't over here. And believe me, it's easy to do that. But they really learn a sense of, this I'm here when I'm here. And it really does kind of open up that sense of part of the universe connection. So I can only say it's a challenge and one that works. What's a good resource? Do we have some meditators in the room? Can you help us with a resource? Do you know any? Are you looking for information to learn about it? Yeah. 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 If you stop for just a second after this, there's a website that has some guided meditations. And I can give you a couple names there. I'll think of them by then. They're not coming right now. A little bit louder. So you're moving as you're meditating and... Yeah. Okay. So yoga by itself is also really helpful, isn't it? Okay, thank you. I'm sure you all have good practices. I wish we had more time because I always learn from people when I do this, and I appreciate your contributions. So what I want you to do before you go, and there's about 2 minutes, and this is all the time it's going to take, is tell your partner what your contact information is so that person can contact you in 5 weeks. And it's not to give you an A, a B, a C, a D, or an F. It's to say, how's it going? Okay? So share your contact information. We need buddies for this change because it's hard. I want to say thank you. This is a terribly low energy time of the day and you've been great. So thanks much.